Nothing ever happens is a mantra which you've probably heard of if you're as terminally online and retarded as as I am. But there's kind of a philosophy behind this little meme, right? This little Chud Soy Jack meme, right? Which you might not think has really that much meaning, but I think it does. I think there's something to learn from this little cartoon drawing of a mass cheater. There's something we can learn from this little cartoon character exclaiming that nothing ever happens. There are things in the world that we are afraid of, that we are probably unnecessarily afraid of. Because, there are a lot of things going around in the world right now, and if you listen to the news, you'll think that we're living in the end times, that we're living in the apocalypse. And that's not something I blame anyone for thinking, really. Just recently, in the 2020s, things have gotten a lot more radical, so to speak. We went from a relatively peaceful world that we grew up in when we were younger. At least talking from the perspective as someone born in the 2000s like me, we went from that to a world engulfed in conflict. And I feel like a lot of this really began with 2022, or I guess 2021 with coronavirus, which was, as much as I hate people like just bringing it up all of the fucking time, it really was something which really heavily impacted this generation psychologically. It being a something that really derailed the normal motions of society. Really derailed everything. Thanks Biden. We lived through that, and then really, I feel like almost directly after that, or at least it feels like that, we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was or still is, a massive conflict, a massive interstate conflict. Now, if you're not like a war autist, if war isn't your kind of personal autism of choice, you might not think that it being a war between two countries is a big deal, because it's like, isn't every war a war between two countries? But not entirely. Interstate conflicts between two countries have become much less common this century, because we're diplomatic, all right? People have this kind of perspective on things that we've like kind of evolved past our the era of violent interstate conflicts that devastate the entire planet and kill shit-zillion people. The people generally think that we evolved past that, but that really is not true, I guess, just seeing from what's happened in Russia. But generally nowadays wars are fought between two like non-state actors, or between a nation state and a non-state actor. So, really, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was sort of I think almost an earth-shattering kind of breaking of how people thought that the world, was, that we had evolved past, devastating, years-long interstate conflict, right? Because for the, longest time, I feel people have sort of lived under the perspective that we were living at the end of history, since, great American liberty overcame Soviet and fascist tyranny, that we had kind of overcome all this, devastating conflict. But I guess not, given the fact that we're still, living through major global events, And then, in 2023, you had the beginning of the Israel-Palestine conflict, which destabilized not only that entire region, but also basically every country that supported one side or the other. To be fair, it's mostly countries that support Israel. We're being bombarded with all of this news about how the world is ending, and I feel like with Trump back at office doing whatever the fuck he's doing, we have to deal with all kinds of wacky domestic politics as well. We have this crazy dude in office, and he just crashed the economy for no reason, and he's all types of doing all types of wild shit. We have Elon Musk, in power. I can make an entire video about how I hate Elon Musk, but you know that's not what we're talking about right here. This is a Chud philosophy video. This is Chud philosophy. All right. We feel like almost that we're at the end times, you know, and you know we feel like we're at this like apocalyptic era. You know, we feel like the West has fallen. You know, that's kind of how people view how things are going right now. You know, there's a lot of apocalypse, you know, generally with people. When you look at any era, people generally will try and prophesize the end of the world. And this is something that you see no matter the culture. You know, people are always saying that this is the end. People really like to estimate the importance of what's happening right now over what's happened in the past. You know, I feel like a great example of this is you know, American elections, because literally every election is presented like the most important election in this country's history. You know, when you know the election with Trump, right? That was called the most important election in this country's history, right? It was the very most important one, and people pretended like this would make or break the country. You know, if we elected the wrong guy, you know, choose which one you think that is, you know, then, you know, the whole American experiment would be dead, and, you know, we would become some kind of evil fascist or communist dictatorship. I mean, depending on which side you know, whose doctrine you adhere to. You know, that's a really good example, I feel like, of the apocalypticism. I don't know how you're. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about. That's a good example. People always like to think that this is the most important era in human history, and that it's, you know, everything that happens now is more pivotal than it might actually be, right? And we can see, you know, with what's happening to Trump right now, is he turning the U.S. into a fascist dictatorship? I mean, if you really look what happened with other previous dictatorships, I mean, what is Trump doing right now? He's basically gutting the federal government's ability to, you know, insert itself into, you know, aspects of American life and, you know, global, you know, cutting back its global presence. I mean, you know, let's look at the Department of Education. He's trying to destroy the Department of Education and give more power in terms of, you know, education, more control over education to the states. Is that what a dictatorship would do? Would a dictatorship give the keys over to what the youth believes away from itself? I don't think that's what it would do, right? And you look at USAID giving itself less global influence. You know, this isn't what a dictatorship would do. It's, you know, Trump is really gutting the federal government and making it less powerful, which really isn't the actions of a dictatorship. So, you know, that whole prediction that, you know, the lefties like to make, that, you know, electing Trump would literally destroy American democracy and, you know, it'd be like fucking Project 2025, fascism, Nazi Germany, concentration camps or whatever. That's not happening, right? That kind of apocalypse, that idea that we're living in the end times, never happened. It's not going to happen either, because if you look what's happening right now, it's just not what's happening, right? We're not heading to fascism. You can hate Trump, by the way. I don't like Trump. This isn't some kind of attempt to say that Trump is actually awesome. I don't think Trump is good. I don't like Trump. This is not some kind of... We're not living in the end of the world right now, you know. You know, whenever Russia invaded Ukraine, people said that it was going to be World War III, you know. And what happened? What happened? You know, we gave Ukraine a shit zillion dollars, and people said it was going to be the end of the world because Russia was going to attack us for supporting Ukraine, just like how Germany attacked us in World War II for supporting, you know, the UK or whatever. They never did that, right? And there was never any, you know, Westphalian nuclear apocalypse or whatever. That never happened, you know. You know, Hamas attacked Israel, right? And then, you know, I remember this very vividly. I remember this. Everyone was fear-mongering that there was going to be a bunch of terrorism because of, you know, some, like, International Day of Jihad or some shit like that. You know, all the conservative grifters on Twitter were saying that. Was there any big terrorist attack in the U.S. inspired by Hamas or committed by Hamas? No, nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened, right? We're, like, I feel like we're almost, like, 3 years into this war in Palestine, right? I don't even think any attacks have happened in the U.S. that have had any real significance. I mean, I'm sure something's happened. I'm sure, like, some schizo Muslim immigrant or whatever has, like, killed a bunch of people because they were mad at what's happening in Israel, right? But I mean, like, was there any big campaign by jihadists in the West to attack us because we supported Israel? Not really. That did not happen. And honestly, I don't think it will happen. You know, because why would they do that when they're fighting a war with Israel? It's nothing ever happens, dude. Nothing ever happens. I could name like 1,000 different, global events or whatever, or like different things that I've heard in the news, because I keep up with the news. I keep up with the news. I like to know what's happening. So I know so much, like so many events, right? I know so much, right? And I know so many things which retards on Twitter have hyped up as being the biggest thing in the world, or how it's going to end the world, right? And guess what, dude? Nothing ever happens. This is the philosophy of the Chud, right? Because, I made this video many, many moons ago entitled "The West Has Fallen," about another Chud philosophy, right? About the degeneration of society, about how the West has fallen, right? And, that term is generally associated with fear-mongering by people on the right about how, like, gay people exist, the West has fallen. I saw a Muslim person, the West has fallen. I saw a white woman with a kiss a black man, the West has fallen. It's kind of associated with that. But I feel like the Chuds, right, my people, the Chuds, have become highly demoralized in these recent years over the lack of anything happening, right? Because it's like everybody wants to think that their political opinions are like important, and that the movements that they belong to will have any kind of importance in 100 years, or hell, even 10 years, right? Like they don't want to think that what they're fighting for right now is basically useless and that nothing will happen. No one gets involved in politics thinking that their opinion doesn't mean anything and then nothing will happen, But I feel like, again, the Chuds have become demoralized because really, people have gotten so hyped up, right? They've had so much anticipation and fear over all of these recent events. And you know what? It didn't mean anything. All of their fear, all of their anticipation, all of their excitement never amounted to anything because nothing ever happens. And I feel like this is a major change in not only Chuds, right? Not only in the Chud nation, the Chud ethno-state. I think it's a difference with how people think. The thing is, this isn't just in geopolitics or whatever. This is something that will affect us. These are words of wisdom, right, from Dr. Chud. I saw this article, right, and it says 90% of things that we're afraid of never actually happen. Is that this is true? If you ruminate for long enough, you could basically rationalize, the idea of any negative event happening in your life, right? People, you can basically, if you look at the chances, there's a chance of anything bad happening to you. You could get cancer. In fact, you probably will get cancer, but that's not really the point that I'm trying to make here. Anything bad can happen to you, basically, right? And if you ruminate for long enough, you can find so many different negative events that could possibly happen to you, right? But the thing is, how many of them actually do occur, like end up occurring, right? Really, not really very many of them, right? Because our lives are significantly more boring than we might want them to be. We want to think that our lives are interesting, but really they aren't. And we want to have these big adversaries. These big challenges to overcome, because it kind of gives meaning to the struggle. That we're just like waking up and living every day to like do nothing and have nothing happen. But the truth is that that's really how it is. When you wake up, nothing that interesting is likely gonna happen. Because you aren't you're not the president, bro. All right, you really don't have that much on your plate. You go to your job, maybe hang out with your friends, play some video games, get high, jerk off. I don't know, dude. Like whatever you want to do with your life. You know, that's kind of just how it is. It's not very interesting, right? And you can ruminate as much as you want, but that isn't going to change the fact that your life is boring, you know, and that you know, nothing very interesting is going to happen to you, right? You're not going to get hit with a lightning bolt. You're not going to get you're not going to get the fucking bubonic plague, you know. You're not going to live through a war. You're probably not going to live through a natural disaster, you know. You're not going to be conscripted and sent to fucking Ukraine or whatever. You know, you're not going to live through a nuclear bombing of your city. You know, I remember when I was a very small child in like elementary school, and there were people worried about North Korea. All right, there was a kid saying, he was like, dude, if we get hit with a bomb by North Korea, you know, that would affect us, bro. The blast radius would hit Missouri. And I was like, the thing is, to be completely honest, I don't even know if a North Korean nuclear bomb, if it hit fucking New York, would have any effect on like Missouri or like the specific settlement which we were at. Like I like maybe Fallout, I guess, but like the blast, or like I think we'd mostly be fine. But like whatever, you know, that never happened, bro. You're not gonna get hit you're not gonna get directly hit with a fucking nuclear bomb, bro. You're not gonna get hit by the thin man or the fat man or the little boy. You know, you're gonna be fine. You're not gonna be hit with fucking Tsar Bomba. You know, you're gonna be good. You know, you're gonna keep living your boring life where nothing happens. You know, just remember, nothing ever happens, and you know what? That's not that bad.